Hello there, Alan Plum here with a little more from Shed Engineering. The first thing on the project was to try and make a flywheel. Without a lathe, obviously not easy, and I wanted something of a reasonable size and to look respectable and hopefully resemble a true cast iron flywheel. It's 15 inches or almost 15 inches in diameter, and I used 2 sheets of 18mm MDF glued together with ordinary woodworking glue and then clamped and left overnight to dry. I've got the luxury of a large bandsaw, as you can see. That came from some wood carving many years ago, but it's not beyond the possibilities of most chaps that that can be cut out with a jigsaw or even a handsaw and then shaped down with a plane, etc. As you can see, I've marked it out and drilled in the corner for each spoke. I did that with a battery drill, but I made sure that I was keeping the drill vertical. Then it was a matter of cutting between the spokes, and as you can see, that was done with a jigsaw, cutting well on the inside of the line so that I'd got plenty to play with. Now, one of the problems I had is that with my small drill stand I couldn't reach across to the centre where the crankshaft is going to be. Luckily I realised this at an early enough stage, and that determined the size of the flywheel to an extent, because if I took the motor off, put the wheel over the stem, I could reattach the motor, and that allowed me to reach the centre to drill out for the crankshaft. The crankshaft was a spindle or shaft that came off a dumb waiter that I purloined while I was doing a asbestos survey in a derelict building. And so here you can see that I've mounted the crankshaft through the flywheel and got it mounted on some 3x2 and other bits of timber, and put a handle on so that I could start to true up the wheel. And as you can see, even though it's quite crude, I'm actually managing to turn down the outside of the flywheel. I obviously wanted to put some detail into the rim of the flywheel, and so here I've got it mounted horizontally, and the crankshaft is going down vertically into a hole that I've drilled in the bench. Then on the crankshaft I've got what amounts to a toolbar, just a piece of 3x2 sticking out like a compass arm. That's the best way to describe it. And here you can see I'm clamping a chisel just at a slight angle onto that tool arm so that I can rotate the wheel and gradually put some detail into the rim. Now obviously that tool arm is going to drop down and dig in, so I've got this arrangement with a bolt sticking up and a nut and a little bit of coat hanger wire. That is effectively keeping the toolbar up in the air, so that I can have a little bit of control over it. You can see that I've carved down the spokes. I used a chisel for that. I'd made myself a template to carve those down and get them pretty much the same. And then, as you can see here, I'm starting to put the detail in. There you can see the chisel working on the inner edge. I would have then obviously repositioned it 2 or 3 times perhaps, working my way out towards the edge of the flywheel to put that groove in. You can also see where the spokes are there, how I've turned down the inside edge of the flywheel to try and true that up as well. Again, repositioning the chisel in different positions to get that detail. Here you can see where I've trued up the inside of the flywheel rim, but I can only go down as far as the spokes, which left this excess material on the inside. A small draw knife would have been ideal, but I found that the edge of the chisel here was sharp enough to clean that away. I also used the same principle to do the spokes coming out from the hub out to the rim, and then obviously used sandpaper to clean it up, and then worked on the junction between the spokes and the rim, cleaning that down with a chisel and then using sandpaper to clean it up. Quite a tedious job, but it turned out quite well in the end. You can see also that I've glued on a boss on both sides in the centre there. That was roughly cut out, and I think in a moment you'll see how I true that up. So here you can see how I've got it set up again, and I've got a chisel mounted on the 3x2 toolbar there, and I'm actually turning just a small rim at the base of the spokes, just to give a little bit of added detail. And in actual fact, at that angle the chisel was cutting quite well. That worked quite nicely. And here you can see how I've repositioned the chisel, tapping the toolbar down as I try and true up the central boss that I've glued on. And this shows what can be done with a little bit of perseverance and lateral thinking. It's had 2 coats of fiberglass resin. That raised the fibres quite a lot in the MDF, and it needed quite a lot of tedious rubbing down, but finally with a couple of coats of paint you can see it's still masked up. I think we've got quite a reasonable result. You can also see the shaft that I used from the dumb waiter quite clearly there, and I was very pleased in actual fact for a wheel of that size just how true it is. This is the start of the crankshaft bearings. 4 pieces of MDF glued together with ordinary woodworking glue. I wanted them to look like realistic castings, and that's how they started off. At this stage I wasn't at all sure what the actual bearings was going to be. I knew it was beyond my capability to make brass bearings, but for the overall look I was trying to get something that looked realistic, and was experimenting with these little plastic inserts, and I actually ran the flywheel and crankshaft in them, and surprisingly enough they worked very well. There was very little friction and showed quite a lot of potential. It gave the possibility to shim them up and down with little bits of card or tin or anything like that. But my main concern was lubrication. Any amount of oil would soak into the MDF and it would soak it up like blotting paper, and I obviously didn't want them to swell and start to fall apart. And so the engine was showing so much potential that I actually decided to go for roller bearings that I thought would sort of run very well with a minimum of lubrication. And there you can see a bearing cap. I still haven't got them finished. I've got a temporary strap over them at the moment. And here you can see me working the MDF down, shaping it with a chisel, numerous other tools, files, little gouge, and my rotary Dremel. All very handy for shaping it down and sanding it up. Again, my main concern, as I said earlier, was trying to seal the MDF. I was very worried about oil soaking into them, and hours of work suddenly going to rack and ruin as the oil soaked into the MDF. So such parts as this had 2 or 3 coats of fiberglass resin and a couple of coats of paint to try and seal them. And here we have the flywheel and bearings fitted to the engine. As you can see, just temporary bearing caps. The roller bearings did take a bit of fiddling around with, scraping out the bottom of the recess to make sure the crankshaft was perfectly level and horizontal. She works perfectly fine without the lead tyre. That was just added to see how slowly she would actually run. But she's looking quite respectable. Hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you for watching.